Tonight, I am going to complete the last chapter linking us aspirations in the book Interconnected by Galwan Karmapa, where I left off last time was the end of the section, and the section that I ended with was not losing heart. So I am beginning tonight with the section titled Aspiring for Self and Others. And I'm going to start out with a quote from the book. If your personal goals are healthy, which means consistent with interdependence, then they will naturally have a positive effect on the world. So that seems like a very good place to begin. If we flourish, we help others flourish. It's really that simple because we are part of others and others are a part of us. When we flourish, it increases the happiness of those that we care about, those that we come in contact with. Collective happiness increases. And since we are part of the human community, the entire human community benefits. Very simple terms, it's the ripple effect. What we do affects people all over in ways that are not always, in fact, usually are not always that obvious, and frequently are just plain hidden. I think we've all had the experience where someone comes up to us and says, you know, you did something way back, and it really got me thinking. It made a difference in my life. It got me to see things a little differently. And so we always have that opportunity to affect others. It usually is that the people will not come back and thank you. They might not even be aware that what you did affected them. But the bottom line is because of interdependence and interconnections that we are influencing people all the time. Here is another quote that is in the section titled Music of Change. Quote, the fact that things are changing all the time means that we live in a constant state of possibility, that there are always new possibilities, new opportunities, that every moment is new. It's not the same old, same old. Physical things change. I think you have heard me say that because of impermanence, maintenance is permanent. And it is true that physical things change, our bodies change. Yesterday, I had to drive to the dentist and I got in my car and it just wasn't handling right. And I looked at the dashboard and my low tire inflation light went on and the tire was darn right flat. It wasn't underinflated, it just wasn't inflated. Well, that's cars for you. They like maintenance. Well, maybe like is a little bit too strong. They require maintenance. So our experiences change too, that the good times don't last, the bad times don't last. It's actually important that things change because if things didn't change, there'd be no room for new experiences. It's that simple. If there wasn't this constant change, then we would be, I guess, like the Groundhog Day movie, that we would be doing the same thing over and over and over again, and there would be no chance of improving. So if we can understand this, it also gives us a window onto the understanding of emptiness. The reason why things are changing is because they have no permanent essence. And really, that's what emptiness is about. It's not some really complex idea of everything is void. It's just that things have no inherent essence, that they depend on causes and conditions to arise. And when the causes and conditions are no longer there, they cease. So impermanence is neutral. It's neither good or bad. And the observer decides whether it is good or bad or neutral. And that's a very important point. It is how we view it that determines whether we feel it's good, bad, or neutral. Karmapa uses music as an example of this. If the notes didn't change in music, you wouldn't have music. You would just basically have noise, one constant noise that didn't change, or sound. Some people might like the sound, but you wouldn't have different notes. I remember, I think it was Louis Armstrong, that he was once asked about jazz, and he said, it's not the notes, it's the space between the notes that's important. So it's the same idea. What makes music interesting is that it's constantly changing. Now, there's going to be repetition and patterns that emerge with the changes, but it is that there's a lot of space between the notes, and the notes there are different notes, different octaves, and so forth. Quote, knowing that things will not always be as they are now can inspire us to dream of how else things could be, to dream about possibilities that are better than what is happening now. He talks about Martin Luther King and his I Have a Dream speech. Dreams and aspirations are important in Buddhism, that these propel us into productive, beneficial actions, and they help us create a future that we want, a future that is better than the present. Again, the past is past. We're not bound by the past. And there is freedom from the past, that every morning brings new life, new possibilities, new aspirations, perhaps new directions. And again, this reminds me of Kung Fu Panda. And I forget what the name of the martial arts master was, but he said that the past is past, the future is a mystery. Today is a gift, that's why they call it the present. That might be Disney's version of Eastern thought, but there's a lot to that very simple saying. He finishes up this section by talking a little bit about laziness. There are different forms of laziness in Buddhism. One is self-deprecation, which is, oh, I could never do that. So, of course, you're already encouraging yourself to be discouraged. to not even try. I like to put in the other two types of laziness in Buddhism. The second one, I do not know what the Tibetan name is, but I call it couch potato. And I think that's a very apt description. Lying around on the couch, maybe you've got this little remote in your hand, and then you don't have to do much to change the channel, adjust the volume or whatever, turn it off and take a nap because you're tired from flipping through the channels. It's hard work with a remote, you know. And then, you know, you get up and eat something, and then you got to go back to the couch or go to bed and so forth. And you never get much done. You think about all the things that need to be done, but just thinking about them is so overwhelming that you decide you better rest up so you have the energy to do something when you do have to finally do something. And the third type of laziness is what I call a busyness, where you're just keeping busy with things that aren't really all that important, but it keeps you from doing what needs to be done, like cleaning the house up, washing your dishes. It's important to be aware of how we kind of prepare ourselves to fail through laziness, through one or more of these types of laziness. And what we need to do is have these high aspirations, which I've talked about earlier, I believe. Now, the next section is a place for the impossible. Because of impermanence and interdependence, as I said, the world is not static, that it is dynamic, that there is this, quote, fluid interplay of causes and effects that opens up the world to endless possibilities, fresh possibilities. I have found that both from my own life and again, talking with other people and observing other people and so forth, that there are lots and lots of opportunities that we could take advantage of in life. And usually the opportunities are not seen as opportunities. Instead of going to places that are not so known and therefore maybe a little bit uncomfortable or even frightening, that we tend to go to where we're comfortable and feel safer. I remember a friend of mine, actually it was a couple, and this was way, way, way back in the late 60s and early 70s. The man had worked for Honeywell as a scientist, and Honeywell downsized his department, and so then he got a job teaching at a college. He was chairman department, I think, of physics. Well, his wife was in art, majoring in art, and quite a good artist. But besides that, she also had a good sense of business. And she started designing store displays for big companies, you know, with her artistic flair. And then her husband got into this and he quit. And his fellow professors were going, "Oh no, you're ruining your life. You're throwing away all this." And I haven't had contact with them for decades, but I know this would have been around 1990. The woman would go to New York City for these trade shows, and she would rent out a suite in a big hotel in New York City, set up her wares. People would come. that would come to this trade fair and see what she had. And I remember that she was talking about one of her contracts was with Lee Jeans, and that it was to have displays in stores wherever Lee's had their jeans displayed. So she would take these designs to a fabricating company where they would make them following her design, and then they would ship them to wherever. Last I heard, they were out in California, had a very nice home worth millions. And meanwhile, the college professors, well, maybe their work had more value. They felt safer, and they stayed there and thought that he was making a huge mistake by leaving academia. And this might be about material success, but it can be the same way with spiritual success. The 3-year retreat that I did, there were people there that could have done the 3-year retreat, but they felt that they could not separate from their mundane life and their job and their careers and so forth. And so they never did the 3-year retreat. And I've heard some regret from some of them. So life is presenting us with all kinds of opportunities. And if we open up to them, it is, you might say, amazing what is possible. So now we need to make these aspirations. Kind of got off on a tangent here. This section is a place for the impossible. We have these straightforward hopes and wishes that certain things are possible. And he says, even if they are not probable, even if you might say the probability of these things happening are very, very small. And then there are aspirations that we'll never be able to accomplish. He used the example, ending world hunger, ending war, ending disease. Here is a quote: "With such aspirations, we give our imaginations the freedom to move beyond the boundaries of what we know to be possible." And this opens up our heart. It fortifies our heart. It brings, quote, "fierce resolve." This allows us to accomplish aspirations that would be extremely difficult to accomplish otherwise. Again, it makes things possible that might seem impossible. And these vast aspirations, they open up our mind. They help us to not give up. They help us avoid becoming discouraged. It allows us to see obstacles as being just limited rather than a huge or insurmountable. It brings things down to a workable size, you might say. Now, he points out the difference between expectations and aspirations. Expectations are about desire, that's something that we want. And aspirations are more like needs, that there is a stronger reason to accomplish the aspiration. Quote, "With aspirations, we see the aim as something vitally important and are willing to create whatever causes are needed." Then the next section is the power of imagination. Imagination is an inner condition that will allow outer and other conditions to, you might say, surface, to emerge, to arise, and to interact and eventually make an impact on the world around us. And it's interesting now, like, what is our imagination? A lot of people have no problem imagining negative things happening to themselves or to other people, their loved ones, to the world, or whatever. And why not have positive imagination? Why not think positively and imagine a world where your aspirations for harmony, for peace, for people loving each other, and so forth, where this actually comes true? When we do deity practice, we imagine ourselves as an enlightened deity like Chenrezig or Atara and so forth. We're using our imagination in a very positive way. So our imagination, if we use it correctly, it can be seen as a blueprint, Karmapa says, for mapping our aspirations into the world. And with our imagination, this allows us to bring forth our compassion, our inherent wisdom, our responsibility, our love, and so forth. This allows movement from ideas to our feelings, and from the feelings then bring them into our life and into the world. So our imagination is very important, very powerful. Why not use it in a positive way rather than worrying about things happening or not happening? It's interesting how you worry about things happening, negative things happening, and then you worry about positive things not happening. Take your pick. They're both using our imagination in a way that isn't very productive. So if we are wise and can use our imagination in a positive way, it's a bit like the moon that radiates on everybody without distinction. He talks about visualization in our practice, our Vajrayana practice, that the aim of our visualizations is to develop and intensify, increase our compassion so that we act spontaneously and continuously to end the suffering around us. Now, the next section is engaging the senses. And here, again, he's talking about deity practice, that the image of the deity represents the qualities that we want to see in the world. We keep going with this image of the deity. This is one of the instructions when you're finished with, let's say, Chenrezig, is that you imagine that you are Chenrezig, that all sound is the sound of his mantra. All thought is the mind of Chenrezig. So you bring this into your daily life as you're going through it. And this vitality and momentum, which comes from our imagination, brings our whole being into the world this way. And this helps us then relate to real people in real life and translate it into action of one form or another. So there is a quote here: connectedness, compassion, and all other values of interdependence must arise to action. So what keeps it real and avoids these visualizations being an intellectual exercise. I wrote here in my notes, talk is cheap. Put your money where your mouth is. Engage. Now, the next section is sharing aspirations. And he starts out this section with this quote, which I like. All these quotes that I'm reading, I like. He has a very good way of putting his ideas into words. Quote, we could make significant change just by consciously harnessing our various skills to positive aims. And what he's saying here is all of us have different skill sets, that your skill sets are different than my skill sets. And this is natural, this is normal. And so that we have working with us these days, we've got technology, the very fact that this is digital on Zoom and soon to be on YouTube. We have things that technology that is available that was not available 30 years ago, even 20 years ago. And advances, scientific advances, can create positive change. He talked earlier in the book about some of the disadvantages of social media versus in-person contact, but there are also advantages too, that if this were done in person, most of you wouldn't be here. Certainly, Patricia, who lives in Canada, would not come for an hour and a half talk of mine from Canada. And when this is viewed on YouTube, people will be watching from all over the world. So technology does open up opportunities and in some ways make change easier. So if we can have these vast aspirations and we can use technology to bring people together to share common aspirations, then we become much more powerful than separate individuals. And this is what this whole book is about. It's about connecting people all over the world with the aspirations in the book. Quote, therefore, along with knowing how to nourish our own noble intentions and aspirations, it is important to know how to support others' aspirations. And this is, you might say, the next step is sharing these aspirations, helping reinforce the aspirations that other people have. And then, of course, engaging in action of some kind or another. He quotes this German pastor, and I don't know if I can pronounce it correctly, Martin Niemöller, who was in Germany during the Nazi regime. And this German pastor said, first they came for the socialists, and I said nothing. Then they came for the homosexuals, and I said nothing. Then they came for the Jews, and I said nothing. Finally, they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up. The point being that people need to speak up now rather than when there's no one left to speak up for you. This takes courage, and you may face criticism and confrontation. Again, it takes courage, but we can do it. What comes to my mind when I was reading this was Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master, who he talked about engaged Buddhism, and he would do things specifically to point out to the world problems that were created by the Vietnam War. When the war ended, and then for a few years after that, there were the boat people that nobody wanted. And I actually knew a man that was a boat person. He was Vietnamese. He said their boat capsized and 21 ships went by and did not stop. And he watched his mother drown, and he watched some other people drown. The 22nd ship did stop, picked them up, and took them to Japan. But what Thich Nhat Hanh did, got together a group of other people, and they went out and they actually engaged in action to bring the world's attention to the plight of boat people and how no one wanted them, that they were experiencing this being attacked by pirates and every belonging that they had being taken, their boats sunk, the women being raped, and so forth. But he did this in a very Buddhist way, and it made a difference. And here is a quote. This is getting close to the end of the book. For compassion to blossom, we need to nourish our courage, our altruistic aspirations, our empathy, our sense of responsibility, our wisdom, and many other qualities we have been exploring in this book. And again, to kind of sum this up, we start within and then we work out into the world. I remember when I first came in contact with Buddhism, it was with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche Sangha, and it was very common at that time to hear, if you don't clean up your own garbage before you clean up the world's garbage, or try to clean up the world's garbage, you create more garbage. So we have to clean up what's inside of us. We have to work with our own qualities. Then when we develop some, you might say, mental stability, better aspirations, and on and on and on, going over what I've talked about in this book, then we are finally have the tools and the abilities to work with the world in a very positive way. The next section is titled Out into the World. And here he says that our own life experience is the best teacher, that we can look at our past experiences and learn a lot from our past experiences, that if we look at them with fresh eyes, you start seeing things more clearly. Quote, you can arrive as a first-time visitor to each new moment that opens up for you. His final advice is to live interdependence and live what gives value to your life. The last sentence of the book is, I join my aspiration with yours so that together we can serve as conditions for all beings on this planet to flourish.